Despite establishing a prosperous profession in finance, my father has never found me good enough. My name is Eliza Matthews, and I am 32 years old. This year, more than usual, I dreaded the impending annual family reunion supper. In the hopes that things might change, I had offered him a luxury automobile as a peace offering. I had no idea that a paper in my handbag would completely alter my life. I would at last comprehend why my father never loved me by the end of the night. Prior to telling my tale, please press the like and subscribe buttons and let me know where you're viewing from. Have you ever confronted someone who didn't perceive your value? Believe me, you could find the strength you need in my narrative. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Boston, to strangers our family seemed picture perfect. However, things were completely different behind closed doors. From modest beginnings, my father, Richard Matthews, grew his real estate development business into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Above everything else, including familial ties, he placed a high importance on respect, achievement, and prestige. From my earliest recollections, Dad was never the type of parent who helped with schoolwork or went to school performances. Rather, he was the scathing critic who reminded me that second place was just the first loser, and pointed out that my B+ grades could have been A's. He also questioned why I wasn't selected as team captain. In many respects, my mother Caroline was the complete opposite of him. She was kind and caring when he wasn't there, but when he was present, she changed completely. She virtually retreated into herself, never arguing with him or defending us children when his criticism got out of hand. I didn't really comprehend this relationship until I was much older. The way her eyes would dart to him before she responded to even basic inquiries about dinner arrangements or weekend activities was a sign of the peculiar influence he possessed over her. I grew up in this complex household arrangement with my siblings. Unquestionably, the golden child, my older brother James, was 3 years older than me. He dated the right ladies from the right families, played football, made the honor roll, and eventually followed our father into the real estate industry. Upon graduation from the University of Father's Choice, James seemed to have it easy, or at least that's how it seemed to me. He seems to know instinctively what our father would want, whereas my guesses were consistently incorrect. Despite being 2 years older than I was, my younger sister Sophia somehow managed to get through our father's hazy approval system more adeptly than I ever could. She possessed a natural charisma and an almost mystical ability to read the crowd, knowing when to speak and when to blend in. She wasn't the overachiever that James was, though. She developed as the family's mediator, the one who could occasionally lighten Father's mood when he was feeling down. After really harsh criticizing sessions, the person would sneak into my room to reassure me that things weren't as awful as they looked. However, nothing was ever enough for me. While my father campaigned for me to attend his alma university, believing that my decision was a betrayal of his heritage, I finished first in my high school class and was awarded a full academic scholarship to Cornell. I managed to retain my GPA while working 2 part-time jobs during my time in college. He had, however, asked me why I wasn't interning at more prominent firms during breaks. I turned down his hesitant offer to work for his firm after graduation, since I knew I would only ever be viewed as a pitiful hiring. Rather, with just 2 bags and a strong will to succeed, I relocated to New York City and slept on a friend's couch while applying to every financial institution I could locate. He said, "Let's see if you last a month," when I eventually secured an entry-level job at Goldman Sachs. I worked my way up without family ties or nepotism, and I did last 8 years, not just a month. Driven in part by emotion, and in part by a passionate desire to disprove him. I was promoted to senior investment strategist only last month, making me the youngest individual to occupy the role in the company's history. I was able to purchase my ideal apartment in Manhattan, and still had money left over thanks to the significant pay increase. I felt it would be a great gesture to buy my father a brand new Mercedes S-Class for Father's Day, using the funds I had accumulated. In my ideal world, he would finally consider me accomplished and deserving of his praise after receiving this present. I told myself that it would be worth it to finally hear him say he was proud of me, even though the automobile cost over a year's income. In retrospect, I see how pitiful that desire for approval was and how it influenced all of my significant life choices. My accomplishments weren't really for me. Rather, they were tools in an unwinnable battle for his love. I was purchasing more than simply a fancy car when I made that purchase. I was attempting to freely purchase what every youngster is entitled to, the unconditional affection of a parent. Every year, the last weekend in June coincided with Father's Day. Therefore, the Matthews family reunion also served as a celebration of Richard Matthews' patriarchal status. It would be the same this year, but as the day drew near, I decided to finally stand out by buying that incredibly costly luxury vehicle, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class, with all the high-end amenities my father had once described appreciating at a country club friend's house. My level of anxiousness skyrocketed. I spent 3 weekends looking for the ideal ensemble, something that exuded accomplishment without being overly pretentious. Not frivolous, but feminine. My father appeared to expect women in business to have a conflicting combination. I decided on a navy blue fitted dress from a brand my mother said he liked, accessorized with delicate gold jewelry and pricey but understated shoes. Even while I took part in the routine of preparing, it seemed pitiful. The frantic habit of a 32-year-old child who is still looking for acceptance. As I packed each reunion, which was accompanied by some sort of parental disappointment, memories of previous ones rushed through my head. He had asked me why I wasn't concentrating more on debate after I won the state math competition when I was 16. People are easy to find because of numbers. He just said that my chosen career was less reliable than real estate after I received my undergraduate degree with honors. My first promotion raised worries about whether I had been chosen to meet a gender quota, and my first bonus at Goldman caused him to ask out loud if finance was indeed simply glorified gambling. His pessimism constantly poisoned everything, making nothing an accomplishment in and of itself. However, there was another issue this year that had completely upended my identity. 3 months prior, a well-known genetic testing business that I had utilized out of pure curiosity about my heritage had turned up something surprising. She was not Richard Matthews' biological daughter. Based on her genetic characteristics, I had discreetly sought a more conclusive test after the first shock and incredulity, collecting DNA samples from my father's hairbrush on a quick trip home. The results were definitive and now sit in my handbag in a sealed envelope, a nuclear option. I wasn't sure if I should deploy. So much was explained by the finding. The slight physical disparities and the enduring sense of alienation among my own family. The unexplained coldness of a dad who showed his other children at least rudimentary affection was not acknowledged by anybody. I had a suspicion that he was aware that I had always known and that knowledge had influenced all of our interactions. The day before to the reunion, after making arrangements for delivery to a nearby dealership, I took the new Mercedes to my parents' house in the Boston suburbs. I had meticulously prepared the presentation, sharing a quiet moment for this peace gift, and arrived in the middle of the day when Mother would be at her garden club meeting. Even though it was a Saturday, my father opened the door wearing his typical sharp business casual outfit, displaying a slight annoyance at the disruption. "You're early, Eliza." He looked at his watch as though I had missed an appointment and remarked that the reunion wouldn't happen until tomorrow. "Dad, I understand. In fact, I wanted to give you your Father's Day gift in secret, so I brought it early." With my pulse racing, I gave him a tiny box with the vehicle key and the Mercedes symbol prominently displayed. With the courteous, aloof demeanor he saved for required presents, he opened it. When he saw the logo, his face changed to one of surprise. Could this be a joke? I led him to the front window where the shiny new automobile was sitting in the driveway after he requested. His look briefly changed from one of real astonishment to one of nearly delight before returning to his typical analytical demeanor. "Eliza, this is going too far. What do you want to demonstrate?" Even though he was already heading for the front door with his key in hand, he questioned. "Nothing." I said a falsehood. "I wanted to do something special for you because I received a major promotion." He went around the car twice, looking at it as if he may have an interest in real estate, noting characteristics, and making incisive inquiries about insurance and finance that sounded more like an interrogation than an expression of appreciation. Instead of leaving it in the driveway where visitors may see it, he parked it in the garage after a quick test drive, during which he remarked that the steering was a little loose despite the car's legendary handling. His expression of gratitude was brief, and he swiftly cut the legs out from under my impressive gesture by remarking that I must be doing well to squander money like this. I contacted my closest friend Taylor that night from my hotel room, sobbing as I described the unwelcoming welcome. "What do you know, with the righteous rage of a buddy who's heard too many stories like his?" Taylor replied, "Forget him. Return the vehicle. He's not worthy of it." Still holding out hope that tomorrow might be different, I brushed the suggestion aside. So he might eventually see me and express gratitude in front of others. "Just swear to me that you won't give him that exam." Before hanging up, Taylor issued a warning. "Not unless nuclear fallout is something you're ready for." I said I would. However, the envelope was still in my handbag, a covert weapon that I was afraid of, but also unable to completely give up. As though the surroundings were working together to give the appearance of the ideal family get-together, Sunday afternoon arrived, with the ideal June weather, sunny and breezy. In order to prepare for the expected inquiries regarding my personal life job path, and the fact that at the ripe age of 32, I had neither a partner nor children, I took the long way to my parents' estate. As I went onto the well-known driveway, adorned with maple trees, which was already partially occupied by opulent vehicles owned by my father's business partners and extended relatives who somehow always got the invite list for ostensibly private family get-togethers, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Instead of the Mercedes I had given him in the garage yesterday, I saw it conspicuously displayed near the front entry, placed in a way that would make it impossible for people to ignore it. I took a deep breath, straightened. My outfit did one last check of my makeup, and strolled toward the imposing front door with the practiced confidence I'd built up in boardrooms full of guys who didn't know how good I was. Mother replied whispering as she held me, her face beaming with real affection. "Darling, you look stunning," prior to adding her standard. As though delivering a weather warning, your father is in the backyard with the Peterson gang. As honorary members of the Matthews clan, the large foyer was already packed with relatives, the customary mix of my father's carefully cultivated network of contacts and real family. Uncle George shook hands and boomed, while Aunt Linda's mother sister came over right away with air kisses and quick queries about my romantic life. I knew that our Wall Street magician would annoy my father if he were in earshot. Family friends, second cousins, and cousins moved in regular circles. Every year, the same discussions were repeated with just little modifications. Everyone in the Matthews family theater is acting out their designated parts. The arrival of my father was just as well planned as I had anticipated. Coming in from the garden with 3 business partners, they were all laughing at something that was probably just somewhat funny, but was deemed hilarious because of the speaker's wealth. His gaze moved across the room, nodding and saying hello to each of the visitors before settling on me. His lips tightened for a moment as the recognition flickered, and then he nodded just like he did to distant relatives before approaching his mother to whisper something in her ear. "I don't have a special greeting." The daughter, his middle kid, had recently given him a car that was worth more than the yearly income of most individuals. I acted as though I was unaware. I was discussing my cousin Rachel's medical residency with her. The usual pang of rejection, however, still ached. A few seconds later, Mother appeared at my side and lightly touched my arm. "Your father said you got him a new automobile, darling. How really giving." Her eyes conveyed both appreciation and disapproval of the extravagant behavior as she spoke. "Come greet the Stevensons, please. They would appreciate your thoughts after returning from a finance conference in Singapore." Mother did it this way, constantly interfering, establishing social barriers, and fabricating justifications for family connections that ought to occur organically. As was his way, James came fashionably late. He made his entry with his ideal wife, Rebecca, and their 2 ideal children, giving me the warm father hug I had worked so hard to acquire for decades. "The new automobile is crazy, Dad." You choose to upgrade when I watched in shock as my father gave him a shoulder clap in response to his question. "Son, you have to pamper yourself sometimes." Without acknowledging the gift or my participation, success comes with its perks. Before I could comprehend this obvious erasure, Sophia stepped in and pulled me into a sincere embrace that lasted long enough to express her comprehension. "I was informed of your promotion. That's incredible. Liz, truly revolutionary." Using my childhood moniker, which no one else used anymore, she whispered. Her genuineness served as a salve, but the juxtaposition with our father's lack of interest just served to emphasize the divide. While hired servants passed around appetizers, I saw my father guiding a group of his business partners toward the front drive while making animated gestures through the enormous bay windows. His expression was full of pride, something I had never seen aimed at me as he pointed out characteristics and opened doors of the Mercedes. "He's been doing that all morning," Sophia whispered, as she appeared at my elbow and offered me a glass of wine, which I took with gratitude. 3 distinct excursions for several groups of his friends. "You purchased it for him, according to my mother. Liz, it was really kind of you." As I took a taste of the wine, I observed my father settling into the driver's seat and allowing one of his colleagues to enjoy the opulence of the passenger side. I said gently that I wasn't motivated by generosity. Only once. I wanted him to think I was accomplished and deserving of his attention. "Horrible, huh?" Sophia gave my arm a squeeze. "Not a pitiful person, but you have to understand, Liz." She paused carefully, selecting her words. "You'll never get what you want from Dad. It's because he is incapable of doing it, not because you don't deserve it. Regarding you in particular, there is a flaw in him." Her comment struck with unexpected impact. In a way that my private thoughts, never had seeing someone else admit the dynamic I'd experienced my whole life, made it suddenly painfully real, not because they were fresh facts. In my handbag, the weight of the paternity test appeared to double the sealed envelope, a ticking time bomb that I fervently hoped to control, but also wanted to explode. The hour before supper passed in the steady cadence of Matthew's family get-togethers. In the sole area of the house where the father's judgment was paramount, everyone was moving to the formal living room, which had extremely elegant decor and uncomfortable antique furniture that had been chosen by the mother. I sat down in a window seat a little way away from the main talking circle, sipping a second glass of wine and taking in the well-known family dynamics with fresh insight. James naturally took center stage, entertaining the gathered family with stories of his most recent real estate purchase, a failing shopping center that he intended to turn into opulent condominiums because of his understanding of my genetic otherness, which created an almost anthropological detachment. My partners thought the first investment was risky, but I recognized the possibilities that they had overlooked. From his leather armchair throne, our father nodded in approval as he narrated. Father said with pride, "That's the Matthews instinct. It's in the DNA to perceive opportunity where others see defeat." I understood the irony of what he was saying as James wrapped up his self-congratulatory rant. The subject inexorably swung in my way, the phantom weight of the envelope in my handbag increasing heavier with each blood-related allegation. "Eliza, Richard informs me that you have advanced in your company." With sincere curiosity in his voice, my Uncle Robert said, "For someone your age, isn't becoming a senior investment strategist impressive?" Father cleared his throat before I could reply. "It's an excellent site for stepping stones. However, the finance industry is erratic. It has always been, not like owning a physical asset like real estate." He turned to James. "Real assets are resilient to changes in the market. They endure for many generations." I expected the customary rejection, but it still hurt. The deliberate return to real estate, and James the implication that my chosen professional path is inferior. In fact, I started using the businesslike tone I employed during challenging customer meetings. During periods of high volatility, my division outperformed the market by 22 points and produced 38% returns last quarter. I created our risk assessment approach, and the entire organization has embraced it. After a minute of stunned quiet, Father waved dismissively in response. "Paper numbers. We'll see whether that holds up when the next recession strikes." In order to discuss property valuations, he resorted to Henry, a business acquaintance. "How do you feel about the Cambridge corridor's new zoning?" To refill my drink, I excused myself. I ran into Sophia in the hallway when she came back from seeing how her husband was doing while he was watching the kids in the backyard. She squeezed my arm and said, "Don't let him get to you. Michael's cousin, a financial professional, told me about your model. It seems to be revolutionary." Even though I understood how pitiful it was to still yearn for such recognition, her affirmation made me feel better. When I got close to the bar that was arranged in the dining room, I heard my father's voice coming from his study next door, which was slightly open. The vehicle, indeed, a significant improvement over the previous model. When you put in a lot of effort and create something out of nothing, as I have, these indulgences are earned. Walter Peterson father's long-standing business opponent and occasionally ally was the masculine voice answering. "You old hound, Richard." The humble one always. "During our previous conversation, your daughter Eliza said that she purchased it for you, made a comment on her promotion. She seems to be establishing herself fairly well in New York." There was a moment of stillness before Dad answered. Every word was carefully selected. "Indeed, the girl has always been in a frantic attempt to get attention. In actuality, the chances I gave her are what led to her success. Private educational institutions, ties to colleges, the foundational knowledge of business that I taught each of my children. She's only using the automobile to demonstrate that she's finally putting what I taught her into practice." I was shocked to see my achievements casually erased and my hard-won independence rewritten as somehow resulting from his influence when he had just delivered criticism. I almost dropped my glass because it was so strong. He had always pushed Eliza harder than the others because she required that extra discipline, the talk went on to say, presenting himself as the creator of accomplishments he had consciously disregarded. In the main corridor, my wrath transformed into a cold, clear fury, and I backed off before anybody could find me. James stopped me. His expression was unusually solemn. A word, Eliza. He led me to a peaceful nook next to Mother's cherished orchid exhibit. "Dad said you've been asking Mom odd questions about her time in college. For what precisely are you digging?" I was surprised at how straightforward he was. Actually, I had jokingly asked about the mother's life before to marriage, after the DNA test, searching for hints regarding potential relationship advice. However, I believed my inquiries were adequately nuanced. I gently answered that I was only getting to know her better. Prior to marriage and having children, women of her generation had little possibilities to develop their own identities. James examined me with the critical eye of our father. The obvious similarities amongst the family now felt like more proof of my marginalization. Just stop regardless of what you're doing or the message you're attempting to convey with ostentatious presence and pointed inquiries. There is peace and order in the household. Don't let whatever problem you're creating interfere with that. I nearly burst out laughing at how well his disdain mirrored that of his father. Harmony. Is this poisonous hierarchy what you call it? The system in which the achievements of one individual are praised, while those of another are disparaged? James, I'm not making anything. It's only now that I can see clearly. His voice dropped to avoid being seen. He took a step closer. All of our possessions were built by Dad. Because of him, the Matthews name has significance. Your posh New York job, your modern abode. The foundation he laid is the source of it all. For once, be grateful and respectful. Apparently, sensing the tension, our cousin Rachel came over before I could reply. Is everything all right over here? Aunt Caroline is trying to find you too. Dinner is soon to be revealed, I believe. The flawless solar persona was put back into place as James put on his public grin. Just getting caught up with my younger sister. Talk about business. Nothing significant. Rachel lightly patted my arm as he left. My mother frequently remarks that your father plays favorites as if it were an Olympic sport in which he is adamant about winning a medal. I believe what you've done on your own is quite amazing for what it's worth. My carefully cultivated serenity was almost shattered by her gentle encouragement. I had spent years persuading myself that my perspective, not reality, was the issue. Having another person recognize the relationship felt ironically both gratifying and terrible. Mother gave the indication for everyone to start heading toward the formal dining room when the dinner bell rung. I hovered behind my fingertips, grazing the envelope's shape in my handbag, weighing the possibilities, repercussions, scenarios. In order to shield myself from the harm that the evening would undoubtedly cause, a part of me wanted to depart right away and distance myself from this pretense of family togetherness. However, a more powerful, maybe masochistic aspect resisted retreating, resolved to see this through to at last face the lifetime of rejection with the tangible proof of its underlying cause. After making sure the test results were securely sealed inside the envelope one last time, I straightened my shoulders and headed toward the dining room, bracing myself for the performance that lay ahead. The huge mahogany table that could accommodate 20 people in the Matthews formal dining room, along with the ornate place settings that put appearance before comfort, and the ancestral portraits peering judgmentally from the walls, had always seemed to me to be the ideal metaphor for our family. Like everything else in my father's meticulously planned world, Mother had gone above and beyond with the table settings, which included crystal glasses that caught the chandelier's light, fresh flower centerpieces that were precisely spaced, and name cards with flawless calligraphy that assigned each guest their assigned place in the family hierarchy. As expected, my card was set way down the table between one of my father's younger business friends and the husband of my cousin Rachel, whom I had maybe met twice, kept a safe distance from any important discussions. Sophia and her husband acted as a barrier between the inner circle and lower-ranking family members, while James and his family held the prominent seats at the head of the table close to Father. The mother's seat at the other end was a great representation of her standing within the family, equal in theory, but divided by the table's width. Distant, but connected, Father rose wineglass in hand, waitstaff arranged beautiful appetizers of seared scallops with microgreens in front of each diner simultaneously, demanding instant stillness without a word. The first meal appeared with military precision. "Welcome to our yearly reunion, family and friends." His public presence was polished to a glossy sheen, and he started off with practiced charm. Every year, I am reminded of how lucky I am to have created a legacy that is personified by my family, in addition to a prosperous business. He looked triumphantly at James, who gave him a kind nod. Next came Sophia, who gave me a modest grin before slipping by me as though I were on the same visual plane as the wallpaper. "We would especially like to invite the Peterson Group to join us this year." He went on thanking his business partners. One inherently draws greater success when they are around it. As the toast went on, the father mentioned Sophia's nomination to the community board and James's recent company development. He concluded with a scathing remark that family success comes from following tried-and-true paths, rather than needlessly questioning customs. At last, his eyes came down on me for a moment, clearly intending something. Father used direct questions and subtle clues to guide discourse as the lunch moved through 5 intricate courses, making sure the subjects stayed within his favorite real estate industry realms. Local politics, in which he had sway, and sporadic sports conversations that often brought up James's prior athletic accomplishments. During a pause, Mother tried to subtly bring up my new promotion, but Father skillfully cut her off. "Henry, speaking of financial markets, how do you interpret the Fed's most recent signals?" The fish course effectively erased her work without admitting it had happened. The well-known pattern had completely taken shape, with Father occasionally hurling scathing questions at me that were intended to discredit rather than to engage Eliza. "I take it that your company mostly deals with domestic investments? Given the prospects for worldwide expansion, isn't it limiting? I am aware that the Davidson account came after your promotion. At last year's charity event, James had the good fortune to introduce you to William Davidson." Every statement was thoughtfully crafted to reinterpret any accomplishment as either having a narrow scope or relying on familial ties. I had purposefully refrained from using. I refused to display the emotional response, instead maintaining the kind professional manner I had mastered in difficult boardrooms. He was intent on stirring things up. Actually, Father, the Davidson account was acquired in a blind pitch competition, and last quarter, our international branch integrated my risk assessment technique. There are no introductions. Despite Sophia's sympathetic wince at every exchange, I made my edits with a practiced lightness. The well-known family dance, painfully predictable, a temporary break from the conversational minefield, was provided by the arrival of the main course, an overly complex beef Wellington that demanded everyone's attention for many minutes. Father took advantage of the occasion to open another bottle of wine that was too costly to drink. Over the course of the dinner, his consumption increased gradually, a worrying trend that the mother followed with anxious looks. When coffee and dessert were brought, James leaned over to whisper something in his father's ear and got a dismissive gesture in return. Father's gaze bounced back toward me. What little filters he usually kept were corroded by alcohol. "Eliza!" Richard informs me. Mrs. Peterson said, "You're still single, Moses?" With good intentions. What a lovely, successful young lady. They must terrify the men in New York. Before I could come up with a courteous reply about putting job growth first. Father said, swirling his bourbon, "Eliza has always been more concerned with proving something than building something. Think about it. Some people want success in order to satisfy other needs. Matthew's women have historically grasped the need for compromise in family more than she has. The casual harshness fell with precise accuracy, suggesting that my professional success was not an accomplishment in and of itself, but rather restitution for personal failure. Even from the far side of the table, I could hear Mother's sudden intake of breath. "Richard." He went on as though she hadn't said anything, but she started out with unusual firmness. Maybe Eliza wouldn't have written off the appropriate matches I suggested throughout the years as uninteresting or traditional if she had expressed greater interest in them. She wouldn't have to face her 30s by herself. Every phrase was chosen with care to have the greatest possible impact. Instead of being a hostile judgment, the public scrutiny of my personal decisions came off as paternal care, which created the usual pressure behind my eyes. The impulse to run from the table as a youngster, which contrasts with the mature will to keep one's dignity. Despite the mental turmoil underneath, I took a measured drink of water and noted with disinterest that my hand stayed still. Thank you, Father, for caring about my own happiness. Using every bargaining tactic I'd ever mastered, I gave an equal response. However, as you have frequently highlighted, Matthews is results-driven, and my outcomes are self-evident. The table became silent for the 10th time. While Father's business acquaintances moved uneasily and became suddenly extremely interested in the architectural features of the ceiling, relatives who had observed similar conversations over the years studied their dessert plates. The sum of a lifetime of these incidents, these public humiliations that were flimsily wrapped in family concerns, caused the pressure in my chest to increase with every pulse. These meticulous deletions of my identity and accomplishments. I had vowed to Taylor and myself that I wouldn't use the nuclear option, and the envelope in my handbag appeared to be pulsing with potential energy. While waiters cleaned dessert dishes, I became acutely aware that the present course was unsustainable, and that it would be self-destructive to keep looking for acceptance from a guy who was genetically programmed to deny it. I was out of money. Father pulled his chair back a little while coffee cups were being replenished, and Brandy volunteered to wrap up the sumptuous lunch. This gesture was widely interpreted by the family as a prelude to one of his spontaneous remarks, which had become a custom throughout the years of Matthew's reunions. Instantly, the expected quietness descended. Conversations ceasing in the middle of a sentence's cutlery, carefully set aside, and all attention instinctively shifting to the patriarch. Father stood holding a snifter and brandy, his face adopting the benign demeanor he saved for these public displays. He started speaking in that certain tone of a person used to controlling rooms before we scattered to the garden for our yearly family photo. I want to take a moment to say how proud I am of the work that the Matthews family is doing together, including the business colleagues as honorary members of this fictitious dynasty. He made a sweeping gesture. A family needs vision leadership and members who know their responsibilities in fostering success as a group, much like a company. His eyes moved over the table in that well-honed manner that gives the impression that he is looking at everyone, but in reality, he is not looking at anybody. I'm reminded of how lucky I am to have children who make significant contributions to the family legacy. As I glance around this table, he lifted his drink a little and turned to face James. James, not only do I find your business sense impressive, but the whole Boston development community does as well. The Riverside Project exemplifies the type of audacious, progressive methodology that sets Matthews Enterprises apart from smaller endeavors. You've upgraded the teachings I've taught you in addition to accepting them. James nodded his gratification, scarcely disguised by his forced humility. The golden child's face warmed even more as he moved toward Sophia after obtaining his anticipated father. Sophia, too. Your poise in striking a balance between leadership in the community and family obligations demonstrates exceptional maturity. Your collaboration with the Children's Hospital Board has elevated the Matthews brand to a really prestigious level and served as a reminder to all of us that success truly involves giving back. Your mother and I are incredibly pleased of the ideals you uphold and the family you are raising. Sophia always felt more at ease allowing others to be recognized than being recognized herself, so her grin was sincere if a little awkward. I prepared myself for the inevitable next step. The deliberate omission, the acerbic silence in place of my name, and the practiced style of commendation by exclusion would convey a lot to all those in attendance without the need for direct criticism. In some ways, what transpired was worse. At last, Father's eyes found me. His eyes narrowed slightly, indicating that what was about to happen was planned. As I consider the achievements of my kids, instead of being the preamble to an assault, he continued to modulate his voice in a way that others would interpret as deliberation. It did, in fact, indicate, "I'm amazed by the variety of definitions of success." He deliberately sipped his brandy. The dramatic pause that lets the tension rise. He raised his glass higher and said, "I'm proud of all my children." For a little time, I felt a silly flutter of optimism, but it was swiftly put out by his further remarks. With the exception of the loser seated at the table, a beat of stunned quiet was followed by the words precise harshness, and then hesitant laughter sounded through the gasps. Instead of seeing this as the public evisceration, it was most people assumed it was some sort of inside joke. As every eye at the table turned to me with emotions ranging from humiliation to pity to morbid interest, I felt blood rush to my face and then drain away completely, leaving a chilly numbness. Father went on, as though he had joked lightly about the weather. Some individuals use titles and pay, as well as flimsy accomplishments that seem great on paper but lack depth and longevity to gauge success. Continuing family customs and building on existing foundations are the keys to true success, rather than continuously attempting to establish one's own value at the price of group cohesion. No one was duped by some people's purposeful ambiguity. The object of his comments clear and crystalline. While Sophia was visibly horrified and James appeared smugly happy, Mother's face had turned totally white and her knuckles were bloodless around her napkin. In quiet encouragement, Cousin Rachel stretched over her husband to touch my arm, but I hardly noticed. For 20 minutes, that seemed like hours. My whole being focused on the guy at the head of the table, who had just verified what the DNA test had previously shown me, that I was essentially different from this family and not really a part of it. I stayed still, feeling the bodily pains of clinically detached humiliation, including the burning face, tight throat, fast heartbeat, and adrenaline from the fight-or-flight reaction. My mind replayed a lifetime of such incidents, a never-ending slideshow of public corrections, and subtly undermined accomplishments that were reframed as failures. Each one built on the one before it to convey the overall message that I was essentially inadequate and undeserving of the name. I went by a name that genetic science had just revealed wasn't truly mine. Following his clear exclusion, the father's final remarks about family togetherness seemed hollow. A last connection that connected the frantic kid looking for acceptance and the mature woman who suddenly saw the pointlessness of her lifelong pursuit was irreparably snatched away from me. With its contents no longer a humiliating secret, but a key, the weight of the envelope in my handbag changed from one of burden to one of freedom, releasing myself from the cage of unrealistic expectations that had held me captive for my whole life. The room hung in uneasy tension, waiting for my response, maybe anticipating tears or a hurried departure, as had happened in years before. The usual family drama comes to a predictable end. Rather, I experienced an odd, serene descent, a sense of purpose crystallizing around the choice that had maybe been predetermined from the time the test results were received. I was standing without having really planned the move, and it was so intentional and fluid that it attracted notice right away. All eyes went to me, and conversations paused in the middle of sentences. Expressions ranged from interest to anxiety, the latter mostly from those who had seen earlier conflicts in the Matthews family. I purposely kept my champagne glass down on the table. There is no mistaking the implications of my unwillingness to toast. As I steadied my hands and adjusted my outfit, I was taken aback by the complete serenity that had replaced the previous chaos. as though I had entered a tranquil eye after a storm. "I appreciate your insightful speech, Papa." With ease, I started speaking, using the polished tone I had honed in boardrooms to my advantage in this unplanned situation. "I've been attempting to get acceptance for 32 years. That would never be possible." I was comparing myself to standards that, for some reason, changed every time I got close to reaching them. I finally figured out why the room had become so stale today. The anticipated quiet that comes before important things happen. When the father saw that this screenplay wasn't going as planned, his mood darkened and Mother's face wore a mask of fear. I proceeded with a purposeful lightness that belied the enormity of what was about to happen for those who were keeping score. I recently became the youngest senior financial strategist in the history of my business, developed a career without family ties, and graduated first in my class from Cornell, almost the definition of a loser by most objective standards. I let my eyes wander across the table, making quick eye contact with a few family members who gave me a small nod of recognition before turning back to Father. However, objective achievement has never been the definition of success. In Richard Matthews' universe, has it? Instead of producing one's own light, it's about reflecting glory back onto him and conforming to his particular vision. I calmly and deliberately reached for my handbag, knowing that every action I made was being watched. It was impossible to overlook the remarkable sight of the obedient middle kid suddenly defying authority. "The value of the automobile I got you is more than most individuals earn in a year." When business negotiations weren't going his way, I spoke straight to Father, whose face had retreated behind the icy mask he wore. I still had the naive expectation that a large enough gesture may ultimately close whatever enigmatic gap has remained between us my whole life, not because you needed it or even deserved it. I took the envelope with the paternity test results out of my handbag. The paper now seemed nearly unimportant given the amount of information it held for 30 years. "I hold myself responsible for your failure to treat me with the same love that you give to James and Sophia. In an attempt to become something that will eventually win your approval, I have twisted myself into innumerable different shapes, never realizing that my DNA, not my behavior, was the issue. As a result of my statements, everyone around the table took a collective breath. James stiffened with great focus as registered mothers faced the loss of their remaining color. I positioned the envelope in the exact middle of the table. For you, Dad, my movements were deliberate and calculated. Greetings on Father's Day." With a calm finality, I added all the irony the circumstance merited to the parental title. I didn't wait for an answer, so I turned and walked straight back from the dining room, taking my time maintaining the dignity that had been methodically taken away from me all evening. The stunned hush persisted until I arrived at the way entryway, at which point several discussions broke out, queries overlaying into incomprehensible chaos. Without hesitation, I went outside again. My red skin feels cold against the nighttime air. Decorative lamps provided pools of light in the encroaching twilight along the path leading to the driveway. The Mercedes sat where Dad had placed it to have the best view. Gleaming black paintwork that reflects the lights throughout the home. A representation of everything I'd been attempting to buy with funds that ought to have gone into my own creation. Rather, my hand found the spare key fob I had in my purse, and the remote unlock responded with a soft chirp that seemed unnecessarily happy for the moment. The decision wasn't conscious so much as inevitable, and I slid into the driver's seat, the leather interior still smelling of the new car with a hint of my father's cologne. A scent that will soon disappear through the windshield, a reminder of his fleeting ownership. I could make out shadows of people making expressive gestures at the window of the dining room. My departure and disclosure have now completely unleashed the family turmoil. With costly precision, the engine hummed to life, and the dashboard lit up with welcoming lights as though nothing significant had happened. As though this were just another drive instead of a last departure from emotional captivity that lasted for 32 years. I caught a glimpse of the front door blowing open as I sped down the driveway. The light framed the image of the father, one hand holding what seemed like the opened mail. His lips was open, and he may have said my name, but it was obscured by the soft rumbling of the German engine. The parallel hit me as I drove off the fancy automobile he had displayed to colleagues, while downplaying my role, now physically absent in the same manner he had tried to downplay my presence for 30 years. Together, the two acts of deletion provide the ideal narrative balance. The insight turned what had been an instinctive action into a deliberate choice. Reclaiming the gift is similar to reclaiming one's own value. Unburdened by expectations of thanks that had never materialized in the rearview mirror, I was simultaneously embarking. The Matthews estate dwindled smaller every second, less magnificent every time, as its emotional grip on me loosened with every wheel turn that took me away. Happiness was not exactly what was causing the lightness to sweep across my chest. The strange feeling of freedom and choice, suddenly released from the gravitational pull of parental approbation that had skewed my orbit for as long as I could remember, was too complicated and bittersweet for such a simple term. As I moved away from the area where I grew up, the Mercedes responded with silent precision, putting more and more distance between who I was 30 minutes earlier and who I was becoming now at every turn. Before my mobile phone's first call came through, I had nearly reached the freeway entrance. James's mother and a number of cousins appeared on the dashboard display shortly after Sophia's name flashed, the digital proof of the mayhem I left behind. I didn't entirely turn off the phone, but I did stop the ringing. Even though I wasn't prepared to deal with the aftermath head-on, there was a part of me that needed to see it. Instead of going back to New York, I turned onto the highway and drove into Boston proper. Just as a man I knew as my father hurried onto the street behind me, I gave myself permission to take one look in the rearview mirror. His typically calm visage, twisted in a way I had never seen before, something that went beyond rage into a realm I couldn't instantly place. His voice was too far away for me to hear, but his body language was enough to identify the scream without the use of sound. For a moment, he was unrecognizable as the tamed father who had orchestrated decades of emotional manipulation, his arms raised high in a gesture of such primordial intensity. As I sped away, a visual depiction of the seismic change that had just taken place was ingrained in my brain. 3 pages of scientific evidence and one flash of crystal-clear insight shattered the meticulously crafted family story beyond redemption. My phone showed 29 text messages and 17 missed calls by the time I checked into a hotel in downtown Boston half an hour later. The virtual counterpart of the explosion I set off before leaving. I set the room key down on the desk, kicked off my shoes, and at last gave myself permission to go over the messages, beginning with Sophia's text, which moved from bewilderment to clarity. What just took place? What should I be worried about in that envelope? Give me a call, Liz. The information has everyone in a panic. Dad is saying crazy stuff. Mom shut herself in her chamber. James is threatening to take the automobile to court. Mother's voice messages started off calmly, but then became shaky. A kind Eliza was the first. When you get a moment, please give home a call. Her voice broke with passion as she progressed to her 6th message. The exam must be incorrect. There must be an error. Please return so that our family may talk about this. James had only sent 2 SMS, both of which threatened legal action. If I didn't promptly restore Dad's belongings and take back your abhorrent charges. It was not surprised that my siblings' answers differed. Their responses were exactly in line with their long-standing responsibilities in the family dynamic. With my phone in hand, I perched on the edge of the motel bed. I'm already processing the reunion with unexpected clarity because of the emotional and physical distance. Some deep intuitive part of me may have always known that Richard Matthews wasn't my real father, and the paternity test had proven that the information he had held but never recognized was the reason for the emotional distance he had maintained throughout my existence. I had impulsively purchased the test after learning that my purported paternal genetic markers didn't match up through a recreational genetic testing service. The first shock was followed by an odd feeling of justification for a lifetime of feeling different in my own family. The meticulously preserved family image was crumbling in real time now that the knowledge was out there. The weight of scientific facts is bringing decades of pretending to an end. Nearly 2 hours after I had taken a shower and changed into clothes from the overnight bag I had prepared in case the reunion got too much, I received the most illuminating response. A forethought that now appeared to be foresighted. When Sophia's number appeared on my phone, I felt the urge to hear at least one family member's voice to make sure that the earthquake I had set off had indeed happened outside of my own head and not only inside. The hushed tone of Liz Sophia's voice indicated that she was phoning from a secluded area of the house that was still occupied by her extended family. "Are you all right? You're where?" Her tone of real worry almost made me lose my hard-won calm. I replied in a non-committal manner. "I'm safe. What's going on over there?" She let out a long sigh. "Anarchy, total collapse. Dad opened the envelope in front of everyone at the table after you departed. After reading it for about 30 seconds, I began yelling for my mother. She got absolutely white after just one glance at it. For about 15 minutes, they vanished into his study, leaving everyone to sit in stunned quiet. Then Dad came running out to get you, saw the car was gone, and lost it all. Liz, I've never seen him that way. Never." By presenting the scenario almost as a business case study rather than my real life collapsing and my mother passing away, the clinical depiction of what happened helped me keep my emotional distance. I had to inquire, knowing with dread that she had shut herself in their bedroom. Refuses to speak with anyone, not even James. As you may guess, the visitors all departed very fast after that. James is discussing some sort of injunction about the automobile, which is, to be honest, the least relevant matter at the moment, while Dad has been making phone calls in his study for the past hour. She hesitated and lowered her voice even more. "Liz, are the test findings accurate? Are they authentic?" There was no judgment in the question, just a sincere wish to comprehend. So typical of Sophia's role as mediator. "Yes," I merely confirmed. After a genetic service pointed up discrepancies, I got it done. My real father is not Richard Matthews. In a way that private knowledge hadn't saying the words out loud to a family member made them feel instantly and viscerally true. "Are you aware of who it is?" Softly she inquired. "It is not identified by the test. That only reaffirms the negative match with the father's hairbrush sample I supplied." I described the technical specifics, though it's easier to talk about than the emotional ramifications. I assume it was someone from before she married her father, based on the date and mother's response. After a little period of silence, Sophia asked the question that demonstrated her typical emotional intelligence and her understanding of the issue. "How long has he been known in your opinion?" The question got down to the core of the matter. Decades of mental retribution for an uncontrollable situation is the main betrayal, not the biological fact, with me throughout his life. I responded with a level of conviction that even startled me. Sophia that clarifies everything, every critique, every analogy, every impractical benchmark. He had no intention of improving me. I was being punished by him for being alive. We both agreed on this assessment's veracity without having to explain the innumerable instances that backed it up. "I had to leave," Sophia stated abruptly. "I don't want James to know that we are conversing since he is coming upstairs. No matter where you are, just text me to let me know you're safe. And Liz, you have my undying affection no matter what happens. Nothing between us changes as a result of this." The unexpected confirmation she spoke pierced my chest, breaking the protective numbness I had been maintaining since leaving the home. Upon ending the call, I walked up to the hotel window that overlooked Boston Harbor. The sight of the city lights reflected on the dark water was both familiar and unfamiliar, much like my own reflection in the glass. The man who had influenced my early years by purposefully ignoring me was somewhere in that city, and he may also have been the unidentified man whose genes I inherited. As though the world had finally offered an explanation for the ongoing sense of misalignment I'd carried throughout my childhood, the symmetry of these two fathers, one there but emotionally distant, the other utterly unknown but biologically connected, created a bizarre sense of balance. A last communication from an unexpected source arrived as midnight drew near. Mother's personal phone number, which is rarely used for direct calls. I never intended for you to learn about it in this manner. There was no affair. Before your father, there was a college student. When I found out, I was expecting a child. In any case, your father proposed marriage to me, to tell you his name. Please know that he made an effort to love you as his own. Some males just can't keep their emotions and their biology apart. By acting as though the facts didn't matter, I let you two down. Is it possible for us to meet tomorrow? Only us. You have so much right to know. The message added levels of intricacy while confirming what I already suspected. I hadn't thought of portraying my father as both a monster and a victim of his own limits at the same time. In a less merciful period than our own, my mother was both a swindler and a young lady forced to make difficult decisions. Without answering, I put the phone on the nightstand. The energy that got me through the evening was ultimately replaced by emotional tiredness. Decisions regarding how much truth I desired, how much connection I could or should save, and the direction my life would follow would have to be made tomorrow. Now that the primary organizing factor of gaining the favor of one's father has been eliminated for good, I gave myself permission to shut down emotionally and sleep well tonight, free from the burden of the lifetime of questions that had built up to this day of answers. My awareness of my role in the universe became both clearer and more complex as fresh facts emerged every day during the week that followed what my mind had classified as the discovery. It had a curious dual quality, going both painfully slowly and dizzyingly rapidly. I visited my mother at a little cafe distant from family haunts the morning after my abrupt departure, and I was shocked by how vulnerable she looked. A lady who appeared older and more genuinely human than I had ever seen her replaced Matthew's meticulously preserved matriarchal facade. Thomas Keller was his name. After our coffee arrived, she started without introducing herself. She gripped the porcelain cup with shaky fingers. At Wellesley, we first met in our junior year. He was an engineering student at MIT, wonderfully kind, totally inappropriate for a girl from my family. My folks say so. As soon as they found out about our connection, they banned it. I met your father at a charity event 2 months later, the right fit. Everyone gave their approval. The plot developed similarly to a historical drama. A young lady who was under pressure to forgo real connection in order to progress socially and only found out she was pregnant after the relationship had been violently terminated. Richard Matthews made the marriage proposal in part out of sincere love, and in part because he had carefully considered how Caroline's familial ties might further his professional goals. According to his own mother, he pledged to raise you. Her gaze lingered on a far horizon where the past continued to exist, and I think he genuinely meant to fulfill that pledge. However, you were born with Thomas's eyes, his facial expressions, and his tendency to challenge everything rather than blindly believe what was said to you. Richard made an effort, but each time he glanced at you, he saw the kid of another man. Tangible evidence of my existence prior to him. Over the course of 3 hours, further disclosures were made. The familial dynamic that had influenced my life was revealed in agonizing detail, along with details of a past I had never guessed. My biological father was unaware of my existence. After graduating, they relocated to California, established a prosperous engineering enterprise, married. Technically, my 3 children were my half-siblings. Through alumni newsletters and more recently social media, Mother had followed his life from a distance, but had never spoken to him, keeping Richard's assurance that the past would be forgotten, that if I weren't in blood, I would be a Matthews. We had advanced to the trickiest question by the 3rd coffee. "How come you never shielded me?" I inquired. This one question condenses the cumulative pain of decades. You witnessed his treatment of me in contrast to James and Sophia. You saw him methodically discredit every accomplishment and every effort to win his favor. How could you have allowed it to go on for 30 years? My rage was suddenly overshadowed by the deep anguish that crushed her cheeks. "I let you down." She nodded. No justifications were made. Every time I thought of being honest with you and explaining why he was unable to give you what you were due, the time felt off. The possible harm to great. Then the falsehood got bigger as time went on, more difficult to fix. I told myself you were resilient and powerful, that you were creating a life without his consent. It wasn't until yesterday that I realized how much you were still motivated by that ambition. There was no tidy conclusion to the discussion. Rather, it marked the start of a more open relationship that would take years to reestablish on a basis of honesty. After verifying his identification through public records, I wrote an email to my biological father, Thomas Keller. And he responded the next day, causing yet another seismic upheaval. His response was warm yet guarded, expressing astonishment at discovering my presence. In addition to expressing a sincere desire to connect, I'm asking for some time to consider this information. Once he had come to terms with the existence of a daughter he had never knew existed. In his first response, he said, "I see from your email signature that you work in finance in New York. Ironically, I have a conference in Manhattan next month. If you don't mind, maybe we could get together for coffee." My professional identity was simply acknowledged without qualifier or comparison, and it soothed my deep emotional scars like a salve. His tone of impartial regard raises the possibility of a connection free from the complex. Matthews passed. The professional world continued to swing with pragmatic indifference to my existential crises, while these emotional earthquakes reshaped my conception of family. In the middle of the week, my supervisor phoned to ask questions regarding a client presentation, the routine of work and conversations that brought unexpected solace in the midst of personal turmoil. "You must personally explain your risk assessment approach to the Richardson account." She told me that she was especially asking for your name there. "Eliza, you're becoming more well-known." The recognition of my professional worth, divorced from my family links, confirmed what should have been clear from the beginning, that my value was rooted in my own skills and character, and not in the Matthews name or approbation. 6 days after the reunion, Richard made his first direct contact through his lawyer, sending a chilly official letter demanding the Mercedes be returned and threatening legal action for the public paternity declarations. Everything I needed to know about these guys was encapsulated in the difference between this reaction and Thomas's cautious but compassionate email. Character now appears to be significantly more important in establishing real paternity than genetics. I gave my own lawyer instructions to arrange for the car's return, emphasizing that DNA evidence was by definition not defamatory. Given their true biological kinship and similar philosophy, James's devotion to his father was not surprising, and he remained radio silent. However, Sophia phoned us every day, strengthening our bond via frank discussions about family issues that we had both seen, but had never before publicly acknowledged. During one late-night conversation, she noted that he had been dictating the story our whole lives, forcing us to vie for acceptance that was never evenly accessible. Although I profited from the system, I was constantly aware of its negative effects. "I apologize for not defending you more." I didn't realize the scars were still festering until her acknowledgement helped them heal. The confirmation of my experience from a first-hand observer, strangely more potent than any test outcome could be. My life had changed in both little and significant ways 6 months following the I discovery. My connection with my mother changed into something more real as a result of weekly therapy sessions that helped me unravel the intricate web of conditional love and performance anxiety that had motivated my accomplishments. This helped me distinguish true success from frantic approval-seeking. Her meticulous portrayal of perfection was dropped in favor of open, occasionally upsetting discussions about decisions, the fallout from them, and the nuanced love that had always lived beneath the Matthews family theater. It was in a small bistro close to Central Park that I first met Thomas Keller. It was both unnerving and weirdly reassuring to witness my own facial emotions and body language reflected in a man I had never met. Over dessert hours, he noted, "You have my mother's analytical mind," which led to a discourse that flowed surprisingly well. However, when you discuss market trends, that spark seems to be from my end, through shared intellectual interests and the discovery of genetic similarities that explained lifelong traits I'd never seen reflected in the Matthews family. We developed a relationship that was cautious and respectful of its unusual beginning. Neither of us expected immediate father-daughter closeness. When I accepted Sophia's offer to supper at her house, instead of the customary meeting at our parents' estate on Thanksgiving, the last piece of this mosaic of altered lives came together. Richard had refused to come when I told him I would be there. His persistent rejection is now evoking sympathy rather than suffering. As my own recovery proceeded, his limits became more and more evident. He is unchangeable. As we worked together to make dessert, Sophia gave an explanation. Her kids are playing with her spouse in the adjacent room, but they really can't. His whole being is based on assumptions that your life calls into question. The comment only acknowledged the unchangeable fact that we had both come to terms with without passing judgment. Mother phoned after supper, and her voice was louder than I remembered from my early years. Authentic participation took the place of performance precision. "Eliza," she stated plainly, "I'm proud of you. But not for your work, your home, or anything you've accomplished. Those are amazing stuff. I'm pleased of your character, your tenacity, and your ability to turn lies into truth." The words that I had been seeking from Richard for 30 years, freely provided by the mom who had always loved me, in spite of her imperfections, fell with healing power precisely because they came without restrictions or limitations. I should have said that every day of your existence. I came to the most profound realization of the 6-month journey when I hung up the phone. Instead, their family went beyond legal definitions and genetics. Those who respected your true self instead of expecting you to fulfill predetermined roles, who saw you plainly and loved you anyhow. The expensive automobile I had bought as a last-ditch effort to please a father figure who would never accept me had been repossessed and then sold. Instead of being wasted on false approbation, the money was invested in my future. More significantly, I had recovered the emotional energy I had previously expended on an unachievable quest for approval, rerouting it toward relationships that sustained, rather than depleted toward work done out of passion rather than as evidence of value, and toward creating a life that was evaluated by contentment within rather than by approval from others. It hadn't been an easy or straight road from that disastrous family meal to this new balance. Although there were new difficulties and setbacks every day, the course stayed steadily in the direction of recovery rather than further harm. Quiet Tuesday mornings, when I woke up without instantly evaluating my value, were maybe the most significant indicators of my progress, rather than big epiphanies. When life was lived from a genuine base, rather than theatrical desperation, achievements were praised for their inherent worth, rather than their capacity to ultimately win paternal approval. By the conclusion of this Thanksgiving night, I knew that although my paternity had been figured out, the more important finding was that it was no longer as important. Every time one takes a step toward accepting oneself, whose principles I decided to live by, whose love I recognized as real, and whose reality I claimed as my own, were much more important than the question of whose blood I bore. Have you ever found that blood isn't necessarily the defining characteristic of your genuine family? Those who ought to love us without conditions might sometimes be the ones who cause us the greatest pain. Please share your opinions in the comments section below about how you have defended yourself against those who didn't understand your value or formed your own chosen family. If you found my story inspiring, please click the like button. Get updates on additional healing journeys by subscribing, and tell someone who might need a reminder that their worth is independent of approval from others. I appreciate you listening. And keep in mind that regaining your authority occasionally entails letting go of those who never merited it in the first place.